Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to do this with the Green Party. Um, I think I get asked this question quite a bit about what is Biden's, what is his foreign policy, his military policy, his wars going to look like, particularly compared to Trump, Obama, Bush, et cetera. And I don't think there's really much of a difference. I think what you've seen is a continuation of an evolving policy that really begins in the 90s after the Cold War ends, that then kind of gets off track, if you will, by the post 9/11 wars. And this is something you'd hear quite a lot in Washington, D.C., in the Pentagon, at the State Department, et cetera, this idea that these wars are kind of an aberration to what the actual policy is supposed to be, that these wars have become a sideshow, that these wars are basically not allowing the empire to continue in an evolving manner that is best for the United States, best for the Pentagon, best for the ambitions of those. So what we're seeing, I think, with the drawdown in Afghanistan by the Biden administration is aligning that war with the other wars, aligning that war with the wishes and the intentions of the Pentagon. Again, these that go back to the 1990s. So what you see with the Afghan war, as the acknowledged U.S. forces come out of Afghanistan, leaving the unacknowledged U.S. forces, which will be thousands of special operations forces, CIA personnel, contractors, plus proxy forces, that aligns the Afghan war with the wars in the Muslim world that the U.S. is waging that go from Western Africa all the way to Pakistan. And so what you see here is you see this form of warfare that the Pentagon intends to wage and has been waging, that it lost its ability to control the nature of the warfare, how it wanted to fight, how it wanted to occupy, how it wanted to control by the Bush administration because of their wars in Iraq, and then to another extent by the Obama administration's surge in Afghanistan. But what you see, particularly beginning under the Obama administration, as the policy starts to get more in line with what the Pentagon and all, when I say the Pentagon, I include all its supplicants, that include the defense industry, all the think tanks that are funded by the defense industry, okay, the neoconservative and neo-liberal humanitarian interventionists within the Democratic and Republican parties, all these people who have this who tend to think of themselves as thinkers or strategists, or they represent the thought of the defense industry and the Pentagon. But what it does is it gets what we're seeing is Afghanistan getting in line with these other wars that are being waged again throughout the Muslim world, and that are basically proxy wars, wars that involve very little acknowledged U.S. presence on the ground. Typically, it's American forces that are relatively small in numbers, certainly not like the 100,000 American troops that Obama had in Afghanistan, the 150,000 American troops that Bush had in Iraq. You're talking about thousands of individuals spread across many countries who are there primarily to do two things. One, to train local forces, proxy forces, to assist them. And secondly, to do specialized work, kick in doors and shoot people in the head, basically, is how they define specialized work. And that's where you see the Special Operations Commandos and the CIA commandos who are, located, again, throughout that whole region. But primarily what is being used is these proxy forces that can be, in some countries, they are government forces, like, say, in Afghanistan. It's the Afghan Army, Afghan NDS Intelligence Service, Afghan police. They are sectarian forces, such as what you would see in Syria with the use of the Kurdish forces, the SDF, to fight the Islamic State and to serve as a wedge against Assad's government. And oftentimes these are sectarian forces too. This goes back to the American use of divide and conquer, something the United States government has utilized since its foundation, before its foundation, trying to divide and conquer the Native American tribes and communities. And that has something that was utilized, of course, all throughout the 19th century, through the 20th century. Look throughout really any conflict the United States military was involved in that would be considered not World War I, World War II, but the smaller wars in Central America, the wars in Southeast Asia, et cetera, where one side was tried to be played off against the other. And you certainly, I think, you see this most spectacularly, of course, in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, where the United States pits the Sunnis versus the Shias. And of course, everyone's familiar with how tragic and catastrophic that became. But that is certainly what has been utilized. That's used all throughout Africa, throughout the Middle East, throughout Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, et cetera. This divide and conquer. So you use proxy forces to use most of your fighting on the ground, control the terrain. You have your special operations troops, again, to help kick in doors, to help train these proxy forces, and then you have fire support. You have massive air power that comes in the form of whether it's manned aircraft or, as we increasingly see, drone aircraft. And that's basically the way of war that is fitting to these, the Pentagon, what a guy like General Jim Mattis, who was Trump's Secretary of Defense, what he would describe, and he did describe as border wars, as this idea that we are somehow, as being an empire, we're going to have these borderlands that we're going to have to control. And so by using these proxy forces, by using unacknowledged covert American forces and firepower that is basically untouchable, and if it is touched, it's a drone, so it doesn't, and we can get into this later. One of the fascinating things about the drone warfare is that the entire thing is classified. So it's not even like if a drone gets shot down someplace, there is no responsibility for the Pentagon to ever talk about it. In fact, that would be against the law to talk about such an action, where if a manned aircraft gets shot down, there's no such cover for that. So it's quite fascinating how these very hot, kinetic, terrible wars that are killing, wounding, displacing millions of people, again, from Western Africa to Pakistan, are basically unacknowledged, are by law secret wars. Where this then transitions to something I think that everyone needs to be aware of is how this allows everyone in the Pentagon to get what they want. And I don't think I have enough time to go back into the evolution of this, how this begins in the 90s. But certainly if you think back to when, say, Bush comes into office and before the 9/11 attacks, and how Bush was saying, remember when he campaigned, he said, we're not going to do nation building. Condi Rice, when she was asked about Al-Qaeda and everything, said, oh no, our emphasis is China. Donald Rumsfeld had his whole plan to transform the Pentagon. This is all a continuation of that doesn't get its feet back underneath it until the Obama administration comes on. And, you see Obama surge in Afghanistan, try and save face, right? Try and show that you fought the good fight, give it a decent interval, and then withdraw. And then you have, of course, as everyone's aware, it pivot to Asia that Obama begins in 2012, 2013 or so. But what this does is it allows for those components of the Pentagon to get what they want. So you have the secret warriors, they've got their wars throughout the world, but now the Army gets to have its war in Europe. It gets to have its land war, right? It gets to have focused on Russia. And this allows the Army to have its armored division. It allows for new tanks, new artillery pieces, right? It allows for generals to be the kind of generals they want to be, that they imagine they can become. They can become the next Patton, right? They can become the next Eisenhower. They don't want to, they saw what the results are for generals in these wars. They don't want anything to do with that, really. So there's a lot of reasons, of course, there's money behind it, right? Because this is how you are able to justify new tanks, attack helicopters, artillery pieces, et cetera, if you're going to have a war with Russia. It allows, again, for the armored formations, the bases, that allows for the big army to be happy, basically. And it allows for these generals to imagine that they're going to have a legacy that is more in line with traditional Army legacy. The same can be said of the Navy and the Air Force. where the Navy and the Air Force now can focus on China. They don't have to worry about their B-1s and their carrier battle groups being taken up with rotations off the, in the Persian Gulf, off the in the Arabian Sea, in the Indian Ocean, right, to take care of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, that kind of stuff. They can focus on China. Because again, that's the same type of thing with China, right? This is what allows them to become the next Nimitz or Leahy or God help us, Curtis LeMay, right? This allows this is what justifies $500 million bomber planes, $13 billion aircraft carriers, right? $8 billion submarines. So I think as we move forward, and I'll wrap it up here, as we move forward, we want to look at this evolution of American policy, understand where it comes from, how this came from out of thinking post-Cold War, but also too, how it benefits everyone within the defense, establishment, that $1 trillion a year Leviathan. How does this change in footing for American forces, this assignment of who the threats are to the United States? And I put threats in quotes because I don't believe that they're threats. They're certainly threats of our own making, right? We are creating our own reality here. And when I say we, I mean the United States, certainly not the folks on this discussion, but we are creating our own reality in terms of making these threats, which then justifies all the weapons programs, justifies the bases, justifies the policies. It allows these men and women who are in the Pentagon to think of themselves and advocate for themselves as next generation of warfare thinkers, right? As strategists. So I think it's interesting, and it's in many ways appropriate that Afghanistan is the last of the 15 or 16 different wars that the United States is currently engaged in throughout the Muslim world, to transition to this unacknowledged proxy drone-based form of warfare. And also too, just again, to leave in the fact that just that people to think about how everyone gets what they want out of this in terms of the defense industry, the think tanks, the generals, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much. I look forward to hearing my colleagues and to your questions later.